What would you do if your husband handed you divorce papers at the kitchen table, right after you'd laughed about him with your friends? Can a single cruel joke, told one too many times, shatter a marriage forever? This is how my words and choices destroyed everything, and how my husband made sure I faced the consequences. Before we dive deeper into the story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Lysandra Groves, 32 years old, and I work as a receptionist at Bright Smile Dental. My husband David is 34, a middle school math teacher who always believed the best in people, especially me. We have a 7-year-old daughter named Emma who draws pictures of our family with crayon hearts floating around us. At least she used to. Looking back now, sitting alone in this empty apartment while David and Emma live in our old house, I can see exactly where everything went wrong. But at the time, I thought I was just having a little fun. I thought David would never find out. I thought my words didn't matter. I was wrong about everything. The break room at Bright Smile Dental always smelled like burnt coffee and sanitizer. It was Tuesday afternoon, and I was sitting with my coworkers during our 15-minute break, desperately trying to shake off the boredom that had been suffocating me for months. "So, how are things at home, Lise?" asked Jessica, our dental hygienist, as she stirred artificial sweetener into her coffee. "You seem a little distant lately." I glanced around the small room. Besides Jessica, there was Mason Kelly, the new hygienist who'd started 3 months ago, and Sandra from billing. Mason was leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone, but I could tell he was listening. He had this way of paying attention without seeming to, which I found intriguing. "Things are fine," I said automatically, then paused. The truth was, things weren't fine. David had been trying to get me pregnant for 2 years now, and every month brought the same disappointment, the same awkward conversations about timing and ovulation, the same mechanical intimacy that felt more like a medical procedure than romance. "Just fine," Sandra pressed, raising an eyebrow. "Come on, spill. We're all friends here." Mason looked up from his phone, and our eyes met for just a moment. He was everything David wasn't: tall, confident, with an easy smile that made my stomach flutter. We'd been flirting harmlessly for weeks now, nothing serious, just little comments and lingering glances that made the workday more interesting. "Well," I said, lowering my voice conspiratorially, "let's just say David's not exactly equipped for the job." Jessica nearly choked on her coffee. "What do you mean?" I felt a thrill of excitement at their attention. At home, I was just David's wife, Emma's mom, another suburban woman going through the motions. But here, I could be someone else. Someone interesting. "I mean, maybe there's a reason we haven't gotten pregnant yet," I said with a laugh. "And it's not because of me, if you know what I mean." Mason set down his phone, suddenly very interested. "Are you saying what I think you're saying? Let's just say that size matters, and David's, well, let's call him fun-sized," I giggled, feeling wicked and alive in a way I hadn't in years. "Sometimes I wonder if he could even reach the right spot, you know?" The room erupted in laughter. Sandra was practically crying, and Jessica was shaking her head in disbelief. Even Mason was grinning, though he tried to hide it behind his coffee cup. "Oh my God, Lysandra, you're terrible," Jessica gasped. "Poor David." "Poor me, you mean?" I shot back. "Do you know how frustrating it is to be married to someone who thinks enthusiasm makes up for inadequacy?" What I didn't notice was Sandra quietly holding her phone under the table, the voice recorder app running. What I didn't know was that Sandra's cousin worked at Emma's school with David, and Sandra had always thought David was too good for me. What I didn't realize was that my cruel joke was being preserved forever, ready to destroy everything I thought I had. "So, what are you going to do about it?" Mason asked quietly, his voice carrying a hint of suggestion that made my pulse quicken. "I don't know," I said, meeting his gaze boldly. Maybe I need to find someone who can actually get the job done. The laughter died down, and suddenly the air in the break room felt charged with possibility. Mason's eyes never left mine as he said, "Well, if you ever need any assistance, you know where to find me." My cheeks burned, but not with embarrassment, with excitement, with the thrill of being wanted by someone who didn't see me as just a wife and mother, but as a desirable woman. When I got home that evening, David was in the kitchen making dinner, while Emma did her homework at the table. He looked up when I walked in, his face lighting up with that genuine smile that used to make my heart skip. "Hey, beautiful, how was work?" "Fine," I said curtly, suddenly irritated by his cheerfulness. After the excitement of the afternoon, his predictable kindness felt suffocating. "Same as always." "I was thinking maybe we could try again tonight," he said quietly, glancing at Emma to make sure she wasn't listening. "I know last month was disappointing, but David, please, not now." I brushed past him to grab a glass of water, avoiding his confused expression. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked, following me. "You've been distant lately, and I just thought—" "You didn't do anything wrong," I snapped. "That's the problem. You never do anything wrong. You never do anything at all." The hurt in his eyes made me feel guilty for exactly 3 seconds before I pushed the feeling away. He was too sensitive, always taking everything personally. Maybe if he was more confident, more assertive, I wouldn't need to look elsewhere for excitement. "I don't understand," he said softly. "What do you want me to do?" I wanted to tell him to be taller, more muscular, more impressive. I wanted him to sweep me off my feet instead of asking permission for everything. I wanted him to be Mason Kelly, who made me feel alive just by looking at me. Instead, I said, "Nothing, David. Just nothing." That night, as David slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling and replayed the afternoon in the break room. The way Mason had looked at me, the thrill of being the center of attention, the power I'd felt making everyone laugh at David's expense. I told myself it was harmless. Just words. Just a little fun to break up the monotony of my suburban life. I had no idea that Sandra's recording was already making its way through the school, where David worked, passed along by her cousin with a shake of her head and a comment about "that poor man." I had no idea that David's sister Ellen had already heard about it from a mutual friend and was planning to call David in the morning. I had no idea that my harmless joke was about to become the first domino in a chain reaction that would destroy everything I thought I wanted to keep. 2 weeks after the break room incident, David suggested we have dinner with both our families. His sister Ellen and her husband Mike would come over, along with my mother Ruth. It was supposed to be a nice family gathering, a chance for Emma to spend time with her aunt and grandmother. I should have known something was wrong when Ellen arrived with a tight smile and barely made eye contact with me. She'd always been protective of David, but lately she seemed actively hostile. When she hugged David hello, she whispered something in his ear that made his face go pale. "Everything okay?" I asked brightly, carrying a casserole dish to the dining room. "Fine," Ellen said curtly. "Just catching up with my brother." My mother Ruth arrived 20 minutes later, full of her usual complaints about traffic, the weather, and her neighbor's loud dog. She'd never particularly liked David, always saying he was too soft and that I could have done better. Tonight she seemed especially critical. "David, this roast is a little dry," she announced after her first bite. "Maybe you should have let Lysandra cook instead." "Mom, David's a great cook," I said automatically, though privately I agreed. His cooking was competent but boring, like everything else about him. "I'm sure he tries his best," Ruth said with a patronizing smile. "Not everyone can be naturally talented at everything." I caught Ellen's sharp look across the table and felt a flutter of unease. Something was definitely wrong. "So, Lysandra," Ellen said suddenly, her voice artificially sweet, "how's work going? Making any new friends?" The question seemed innocent enough, but there was something in her tone that made my stomach clench. "It's fine, same as always." Really? I heard you've been having some interesting conversations with your coworkers lately. The fork in my hand suddenly felt heavy. David was looking between his sister and me with growing confusion, while my mother continued eating, oblivious to the tension. I don't know what you mean, I said carefully. Ellen leaned back in her chair, her smile turning predatory. Oh, I think you do. Something about David being, what was the phrase? Fun-sized. The silence that followed was deafening. David's face went white, then red, then white again. Emma looked up from her mac and cheese, sensing the adult tension but not understanding it. Ellen, I don't know what you think you heard, I started. I didn't just hear it, Lysandra. I listened to it. Sandra's cousin was kind enough to share the recording with several people at David's school. Apparently, she thought David should know what his loving wife really thinks of him. My blood turned to ice. Recording? What recording? David's voice was barely a whisper. What recording? Ellen pulled out her phone with deliberate slowness. Would you like to hear it, David? Your wife explaining to her coworkers how you're too small to get her pregnant, how you can't reach the right spot, how she needs to find someone who can actually get the job done. Ellen, stop, I said desperately, but she was already pressing play. My own voice filled the dining room, bright and cruel and unmistakably mine. Let's just say that size matters, and David's, well, let's call him fun-sized. Sometimes I wonder if he could even reach the right spot, you know? The laughter from my coworkers sounded like hyenas in the sudden silence of our dining room. Emma's eyes were wide with confusion, while my mother finally looked up from her plate with interest. But it was David's face that broke my heart. The devastation there was so complete, so raw, that I actually reached toward him instinctively. He jerked away from my touch like I'd burned him. David, I can explain, I started. Explain what? His voice was steady, but I could see his hands shaking. Explain how you humiliated me to your coworkers. Explain how you discussed our private life with strangers. Explain how you laughed about our fertility struggles. It was just a joke. I didn't mean... You didn't mean for me to find out, Ellen interrupted. That's what you didn't mean. My mother finally spoke up. Oh, for heaven's sake, David, don't be so sensitive. Women need to vent sometimes. It's not like she was serious. The look David gave my mother could have frozen fire. Ruth, with all due respect, this has nothing to do with you. Don't you dare take that tone with my daughter, Ruth snapped. Maybe if you were more of a man, she wouldn't need to look elsewhere for satisfaction. Mom, I shouted, horrified. But the damage was done. David stood up slowly, his napkin falling to the floor. Emma, sweetheart, why don't you go watch TV in the living room? But I'm not done eating. Now, please. Something in his tone made Emma obey immediately. She slipped out of her chair and disappeared into the next room, leaving us adults to face the wreckage. David, I tried again. I know how it sounds, but... How it sounds. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. It sounds like my wife thinks I'm inadequate. It sounds like she's discussing our sex life with her coworkers. It sounds like she's actively looking for someone else to sleep with. I never said that. Ellen held up her phone again. Should I play the part where you tell Mason Kelly that you need to find someone who can actually get the job done, and his response about providing assistance? I felt the blood drain from my face. They had the whole conversation. Everything. It wasn't like that, I whispered. We were just talking. Just blowing off steam. Blowing off steam, David repeated slowly. By telling everyone I work with that I'm sexually inadequate. By discussing our fertility problems like they're a joke. By flirting with another man about replacing me. You're being dramatic. Am I? David's voice cracked like a whip, making me flinch. It was the first time I'd ever heard him truly yell. Am I being dramatic, Lysandra? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like my wife has been publicly humiliating me while planning to cheat on me, and I'm just finding out about it from my sister because the whole damn school district has heard the recording. Tears started flowing down my cheeks. David, please, I love you. No, you don't. His voice was quiet again, which was somehow worse than the yelling. If you loved me, you wouldn't have said those things. If you loved me, you wouldn't have laughed when your coworkers joined in. If you loved me, you would have defended me instead of encouraging them. He walked toward the door, then paused. Ellen, thank you for telling me. Ruth, I think it's time for you to leave. Lysandra. He turned to look at me one last time, and the emptiness in his eyes was more terrifying than anger would have been. I'll be staying at Ellen's tonight. We'll talk tomorrow when I've had time to think. After he left, the house felt hollow. Ellen packed up her things without another word, though she did pause to whisper, "You've destroyed the best man you'll ever know." My mother, oblivious to the magnitude of what had just happened, patted my shoulder. "Don't worry, honey. He'll get over it. Men always do." But as I sat alone in our dining room, staring at David's abandoned plate and listening to Emma ask why Daddy had left, I had the horrible feeling that this time he wouldn't. This time I'd gone too far. The next morning, David didn't come home. He texted me that he was taking a personal day from school and needed space to think. Emma kept asking where Daddy was, and I kept making excuses about him helping Uncle Mike with something. At work, I felt like everyone was looking at me differently. Sandra avoided eye contact, clearly feeling guilty about the recording. Jessica kept shooting me sympathetic glances, but didn't bring up the previous day's drama. And Mason seemed different too, more confident, like he sensed opportunity in the chaos of my marriage. "Rough night?" he asked when he found me crying in the supply closet during lunch break. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The reality of what I'd done was starting to sink in, and the guilt was overwhelming. "Want to talk about it?" His voice was gentle, concerned, so different from the cold silence I'd gotten from David. "He heard the recording," I whispered. "His sister played it at dinner last night, in front of everyone." Mason winced. "Ouch, that's rough." "I never meant for him to hear it. I was just venting, you know. Marriage is hard, and sometimes you need to blow off steam with friends." "Of course," Mason agreed, moving closer. "You were just being honest about your frustrations. There's nothing wrong with that." His understanding felt like a lifeline. Finally, someone who got it, someone who didn't make me feel like a monster for having normal human complaints about my marriage. "He's acting like I committed some terrible crime," I continued. "Like I'm the worst person in the world for having feelings." "You're not," Mason said firmly. "You're a beautiful, passionate woman who deserves to be happy. If David can't see that, that's his loss." The way he looked at me when he said "beautiful" made my pulse quicken. Here was a man who appreciated me, who saw my worth, instead of just expecting me to be grateful for his presence. "I should probably go home and try to fix things," I said half-heartedly. "Should you?" Mason stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne. "Or should you think about what you really want? What would make you happy?" Before I could answer, his hand was on my cheek, and he was kissing me. It was everything David's kisses weren't. Urgent, passionate, exciting. I felt alive for the first time in years. When we broke apart, I was breathing hard. "Mason, I can't. I'm married." "Are you?" he asked quietly. "Because it sounds like your marriage has been over for a while. You're just finally admitting it." That evening, I went home to an empty house. David had picked up Emma from school and taken her to Ellen's for dinner. The silence was deafening. I called him 3 times. He didn't answer. Finally, I texted, "We need to talk. This is ridiculous." His response came an hour later. "I'm not ready to talk yet. I need time to process." "Process what? I made a stupid joke. People do that." "It wasn't a joke, Lysandra, and we both know it." I stared at the text, anger building in my chest. He was being so dramatic, so self-righteous, acting like he was perfect, like he'd never complained about me to anyone. Instead of going home, I found myself driving back to the dental office. Mason's car was still in the parking lot. He often stayed late to catch up on paperwork. I knocked on the back door, and he answered with a surprised smile. Couldn't stay away, he teased. David's being impossible, I said, stepping into the darkened office. He won't even talk to me. Maybe that's for the best, Mason said, closing the door behind me. Maybe it's time to stop pretending and start living. What happened next felt inevitable, like I was finally doing what I should have done months ago. Mason made me feel desired, appreciated, alive. Everything David didn't. Afterwards, as we lay on the couch in his office, I felt a mixture of exhilaration and guilt. But the guilt was smaller than I'd expected, easier to push away. This doesn't have to be complicated, Mason murmured against my hair. We're two adults who enjoy each other's company. Nothing wrong with that. What about David? What about him? He clearly doesn't appreciate what he has. His loss is my gain. I went home that night and texted David, working late tonight, don't wait up. It was the first of many lies I would tell over the next few weeks. Each one came easier than the last. David didn't question my sudden need to work overtime. He was too hurt, too withdrawn to fight. When he did come home, he slept in the guest room and spoke to me only about Emma's schedule or household logistics. "Mummy, why is Daddy sleeping in the other room?" Emma asked one morning over breakfast. "Daddy's just having trouble sleeping," I said automatically. Sometimes grown-ups need their own space. "Are you getting divorced like Tyler's parents?" The question hit me like a slap. "No, sweetheart. Mommy and Daddy just need to work through some things." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I meant it. The more time I spent with Mason, the more David seemed like a stranger. The more I compared them, the more David came up short. Mason was exciting, spontaneous, confident. He took charge instead of asking permission for everything. He made me feel like a woman instead of just a wife and mother. When David finally tried to talk to me about counseling, I barely listened. "I think we should see someone," he said one evening after Emma had gone to bed. "A marriage counselor. Someone who can help us work through this." "Work through what exactly?" I asked, not looking up from my phone. Mason had just texted me a photo of a restaurant he wanted to try. Work through the fact that my wife publicly humiliated me and seems to have no remorse about it. "I apologized," I said impatiently. "What more do you want?" "I want you to mean it. I want you to understand why what you did was so hurtful. I want you to want to fix this." I finally looked at him, this man I'd married 8 years ago, and felt nothing but irritation. He looked so pathetic sitting there, begging me to care about his feelings. "Maybe the problem isn't what I said," I told him. "Maybe the problem is that it was true." The words hung in the air between us like a poison cloud. David's face went through a series of expressions: hurt, shock, disbelief, and finally, something that looked like acceptance. "I see," he said quietly. "David, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." He stood up slowly, like an old man. "You meant every word. Both times." He walked toward the stairs, then paused. "I'll pick up Emma from school tomorrow. We're going to have dinner at Ellen's again." "Fine," I said, already turning back to my phone. "I'll probably be working late anyway." I didn't see the way his shoulders sagged as he climbed the stairs. I didn't notice that he was carrying a small suitcase. I was too busy texting Mason about our plans for the next evening. I was too busy destroying my marriage to notice that it was already gone. 3 weeks after David moved into Ellen's guest room, I was feeling confident about my choices. Mason and I had settled into a comfortable routine of afternoon encounters and evening text sessions. David had stopped trying to talk to me about counseling. Emma was adjusting to the new normal of Daddy living at Aunt Ellen's, temporarily. I told myself everything was working out for the best. That's when Jessica invited me to join her and some friends for coffee at The Grind, the local cafe, where half the town seemed to gather on Saturday mornings. I figured it would be good to get out, to show everyone that I was doing fine despite the separation. I should have stayed home. The cafe was packed with the usual weekend crowd, Families with strollers, teenagers on laptops, older couples sharing newspapers. Jessica had saved us a table near the window with two other women I recognized from around town. Karen, who worked at the bank, and Michelle, whose kids went to school with Emma. "So, how are you holding up?" Karen asked after we'd ordered our drinks. "I heard about you and David." "We're just taking some time apart," I said carefully, "working through some issues." "Is it true what people are saying?" Michelle asked, lowering her voice. "About the recording?" Heat flooded my cheeks. People are making a big deal out of nothing. It was just girl talk that got blown out of proportion. "Girl talk?" Karen's eyebrows shot up. "Lysandra, you told your coworkers that your husband was too small to get you pregnant, in a room where people were recording. How is that nothing?" "It was a private conversation." "That got shared with half the school district," Jessica interrupted. "Lysandra, people are talking. They're saying terrible things about you." "What kind of things?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Michelle glanced around nervously. "They're saying you're having an affair, that you've been seen with that dental hygienist guy, that you destroyed your marriage because you were bored." "That's ridiculous," I said, but my voice sounded shrill even to my own ears. "David and I have been having problems for years. This isn't about anyone else." "So you are seeing someone else," Karen said. It wasn't a question. Before I could answer, the cafe door opened and David walked in with Emma. She was chattering excitedly about something, tugging on his hand to pull him toward the counter. He was smiling at her, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in weeks. Then he saw me. The smile died instantly. Emma noticed too, following his gaze to our table. Her face lit up when she spotted me. "Mummy," she called out, waving enthusiastically. David said something to her quietly, probably trying to steer her away, but Emma was already pulling him toward our table. He had no choice but to follow. "Hi, Mummy," Emma said, launching herself at me for a hug. "Daddy's buying me a chocolate muffin." "That's nice, sweetheart," I said, acutely aware of everyone watching us. "Hi, David." "Lysandra." His voice was polite but cold. "Ladies." The women at our table murmured their hellos, the awkwardness thick enough to cut with a knife. "Daddy, can Mummy come have muffins with us?" Emma asked innocently. David's jaw tightened. "Mummy's having coffee with her friends, sweetheart. We don't want to interrupt." "But I miss having breakfast together," Emma said, her lower lip starting to tremble. "When are you coming home, Daddy?" The entire cafe seemed to go quiet. I could feel dozens of eyes on us, everyone straining to hear David's answer. "We've talked about this, Em," he said gently, crouching down to her level. "Mommy and Daddy need some time apart right now." "But why?" Emma's voice was getting louder, more distressed. "Tyler's parents got divorced and now he only sees his daddy on weekends. Are you going to only see me on weekends?" "Emma, that's enough," I said sharply, embarrassed by the scene she was making. "Daddy and I are working things out." "Are we?" David asked quietly, standing up to look at me directly. "Because I haven't heard from you in 3 days. And when I texted about Emma's parent-teacher conference, you said you were too busy to attend. I've been working until midnight every night, on weekends. Lysandra, I know what your job entails. You're not performing surgery." Karen and Michelle exchanged meaningful glances. Jessica was staring down at her coffee cup, clearly wishing she was anywhere else. "I don't appreciate being interrogated in public," I said, standing up, "especially in front of Emma." "You're right," David said. "This isn't the place." He took Emma's hand. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's get that muffin and go to the park." "Can Mummy come?" Emma asked hopefully. David looked at me for a long moment. "Mummy has to ask herself if she wants to come, and if she's ready to have an honest conversation about our family." The challenge in his voice made me bristle. Who was he to give me ultimatums? To make me look like the bad guy in front of everyone? "I think Mommy has better things to do," I said coldly. "Don't you, Mommy?" The words came out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted them. Emma's face crumpled, and David's expression went from hurt to something much harder. Yes, he said quietly. I think she does. He guided Emma toward the counter, but not before I heard him whisper, It's okay, baby. We'll have fun, just the two of us. I sat back down, my hands shaking. The women at the table were staring at me with a mixture of shock and disapproval. Lysandra, Jessica said carefully, what is wrong with you? That little girl just wanted to spend time with her mother. She's fine, I snapped. She's just being dramatic. She's 7 years old and her parents are separated, Karen said. Of course she's being dramatic. She's scared. This is none of your business. You made it our business when you aired your dirty laundry in public, Michelle interrupted. That man has been nothing but kind to you, and you're treating him like garbage. For what? Some fling with a coworker? You don't know what you're talking about, I said, grabbing my purse. David isn't the saint everyone thinks he is. Really? Karen leaned forward. Then why don't you enlighten us? What terrible things has he done to deserve being publicly humiliated and cheated on? I opened my mouth to respond, then realized I had no answer. David's worst crime was being boring, being predictable, being exactly the same kind, steady man I'd married 8 years ago. That's what I thought, Karen said when I remained silent. You're destroying your family because you're bored, because some other man made you feel special for 5 minutes. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to listen to this. No, you don't, Michelle agreed. But that little girl does have to live with the consequences of your choices, and so does David. As I walked toward the door, I could hear them talking behind me in low, disapproving voices. At the counter, Emma was pointing at different muffins, while David listened patiently, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. I almost went over to them, almost apologized and asked if I could join them at the park, almost tried to fix the mess I'd just made. Instead, I walked out of the cafe and drove straight to Mason's apartment. Rough morning, he asked when he saw my face. Everyone in this town is a judgmental hypocrite, I said, falling into his arms. They act like David is some kind of perfect husband and I'm the villain. People love to gossip, Mason agreed, kissing my forehead. They don't know what really goes on in your marriage. They don't know how he's neglected you, how he's failed to meet your needs. Exactly, I said, grateful for his understanding. They only see what they want to see. But even as Mason held me, even as he told me what I wanted to hear, I couldn't shake the image of Emma's disappointed face, or the way David had looked at me in that cafe. Not with anger, but with something much worse. Resignation. Like he'd finally given up on me completely. It was nearly midnight when I finally came home from Mason's apartment. The house was dark except for a single lamp in the living room, where David sat waiting for me, still fully dressed. We need to talk, he said, without preamble. I kicked off my heels and dropped my purse on the hall table. It's late, David. Can't this wait until tomorrow? No, it can't. Sit down, please. Something in his tone made me comply, though I chose the chair farthest from him, rather than the couch where we used to sit together, watching movies. Where were you tonight? He asked. Working late, I told you. Lysandra, stop. Please. Just stop lying to me. The quiet pain in his voice made me look at him directly for the first time in weeks. He looked exhausted, older somehow, like the stress of our separation had aged him years in just a few weeks. I know about Mason Kelly, he continued. I've known for a while now. My blood turned to ice. I don't know what you think you know. I know that you've been having an affair with him for 3 weeks. I know that when you say you're working late, you're really with him. I know that our marriage has been over for a long time, and I've been too afraid to admit it. The calm way he said it was somehow worse than if he'd been yelling. I'd prepared for anger, for accusations, for drama. I hadn't prepared for this quiet, devastating honesty. David, it's not what you think. What do I think, Lysandra? Tell me what I think. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. How could I explain that Mason was just a distraction, a way to feel alive again? How could I make him understand that the affair didn't mean I didn't love him? Except, did I still love him? Looking at him now, I felt pity, guilt, even affection. But love, the kind of love that had made me marry him 8 years ago. I think, David continued when I didn't answer, that you've been unhappy in our marriage for a long time. I think you resent me for not being the man you wanted me to be. I think you started looking for someone else to fill whatever void I left, and you found him. That's not, I started, but he held up a hand. I'm not finished. I think you convinced yourself that I deserved to be humiliated because it made it easier to justify what you were doing. I think you told yourself that our problems were all my fault, so you wouldn't have to feel guilty about the affair. Each word hit like a physical blow because they were true. All of it was true. And I think, he said, his voice finally cracking slightly, that the woman I married, the woman I fell in love with, wouldn't have done any of this, which means either I never really knew you, or you've become someone I don't recognize. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I couldn't speak. What was there to say? I have one question for you, and I need you to answer me honestly. Do you want to save our marriage? The question hung in the air between us. This was my chance, my opportunity to end the affair, to beg for forgiveness, to fight for what we'd built together. Instead, I heard myself say, I don't know. David nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer. Then I think we both know what needs to happen. David, wait. No, Lysandra, I've waited long enough. I've made excuses for you, given you space, hoped you'd come to your senses. But you just told me you don't even know if you want to be married to me anymore. I'm confused, I said desperately. This whole situation has me confused. Maybe if we went to counseling. You can't counsel someone into loving their spouse, David said sadly. And you can't counsel someone into having basic respect for their partner. You humiliated me publicly. You're having an affair, and you just told our daughter in front of half the town that you have better things to do than spend time with her. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it then? Because Emma has been asking me every day when Mommy is coming home, and I don't know what to tell her anymore. The mention of Emma made my chest tight with guilt. She's fine. Kids are resilient. She's not fine, Lysandra. She's scared and confused, and she thinks it's her fault that we're not living together anymore. Yesterday she asked me if I left because she was bad. That's ridiculous. Is it? Because from where she's sitting, Daddy moved out, and Mommy is never around anymore. She's 7 years old. How else is she supposed to interpret that? I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. So, what are you saying? What do you want from me? David stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. I want you to be honest with yourself about what you want. If you want to be with Mason, then be with Mason. If you want to end our marriage, then let's end it properly instead of dragging it out like this. And if I want to try to fix things. He turned to look at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. Then you end the affair. Tonight. You tell Mason it's over, and you commit to working on our marriage. Really commit, not just going through the motions. David, but if you choose to try to fix things, he continued, it has to be because you actually want to be married to me. Not because it's easier than getting divorced, or because you're worried about what people will think, or because you feel guilty. It has to be because you love me and you want to build a life together. I stared at him. This man who had been my husband for 8 years, the father of my child, and tried to imagine choosing him over Mason, tried to imagine giving up the excitement, the passion, the feeling of being desired and appreciated. I need time to think, I said finally. David's shoulders sagged slightly. How much time? I don't know. A few days, a week. Lysandra, I've been sleeping in my sister's guest room for 3 weeks while you figure out whether you want to be married to me or not. How much more time do you need? This is a big decision. No, it's not. His voice was firm now, resolved. It's the simplest decision in the world. Either you want to be my wife or you don't. Either you love me enough to fight for our marriage or you don't. I opened my mouth to argue, but he was already walking toward the stairs. I'm going to pack some more clothes, he said. I'll be staying at Ellen's until you make your decision. But Lysandra, I won't wait forever. I deserve better than that, and so does Emma. As I listened to his footsteps on the stairs above me, I pulled out my phone and texted Mason. Can I come over? I need you. His response came immediately. Always. Doors unlocked. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, telling myself I just needed comfort, someone to hold me while I figured out what to do. But deep down, I think I'd already made my choice. And it wasn't David. I spent the next 4 days at Mason's apartment, telling myself I was just taking some time to think. David texted twice asking about my decision, but I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to face the reality of what choosing Mason would mean for my life, my daughter, my future. On Thursday morning, Mason's attitude suddenly shifted. He seemed distant, distracted, checking his phone constantly during our usual morning coffee. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, just work stuff, he said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. That afternoon, I found out what was really bothering him. Sandra from billing pulled me aside during lunch break with a grim expression. Lysandra, I need to tell you something. The whole office knows about you and Mason. Dr. Peterson is planning to call you both into his office tomorrow morning. My stomach dropped. How does everyone know? Mason's been bragging about it. He told Jake from maintenance that he was helping a married woman remember what she's been missing. He thinks it's funny that you left your husband for him. The words hit me like a physical blow. He didn't say that. He did. And worse. He's been telling people that you're easy because you were so desperate to cheat on your husband. He said you practically threw yourself at him. I felt sick. That's not how it happened. I know, Sandra said gently. I'm sorry, Lysandra. I should never have made that recording. I started all of this, and now it's spiraling out of control. I confronted Mason that evening at his apartment. He didn't deny what Sandra had told me, just shrugged it off. People gossip, he said. What did you expect? I expected you to have some respect for me, I said, my voice shaking. I left my husband for you. You left your husband because your marriage was already over, Mason corrected. I just happened to be available when you needed someone. What does that mean? Mason's words still rang in my ears when I pulled into the driveway of the house that was no longer mine. This was always temporary. I'm not looking to play stepdad. I sat in the dark living room and called David at midnight, sobbing like a teenager. I made a mistake, the biggest mistake. Please, can we fix this? Silence. Then quietly. Tomorrow I'm filing for divorce and primary custody of Emma. The next morning I was fired. That afternoon, a process server handed me a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. Inside, screenshots of every flirty text, photos of Mason's hand on my waist in the parking lot, the original recording of me laughing about David's body to the entire break room, a child psychologist's report quoting Emma. Mommy has a new friend and doesn't come home anymore. David's handwritten letter was the worst part. I don't hate you. I'm just choosing Emma now. You taught me how. 3 weeks later, the judge listened to that recording in open court. My own cackle echoed off the walls while strangers stared. Primary custody, David, house, David. Me, every other Saturday visits in a church basement with a social worker watching me colour with the daughter who now calls me Lysandra when she's mad. When it was over, I chased David across the courthouse steps. 8 years has to count for something. He stopped, looked at me with something close to pity. It counts for the fact that I'll never badmouth you to Emma. That's all it counts for now. Then he walked away with his sister, back to the life I detonated for a man who ended things with a text that said, "Take care of yourself." I still live in a studio that smells like old pizza. Emma's bedroom set is in storage because I can't afford to keep it. Some nights I open my phone and scroll to Mason's last message, just to remind myself how cheaply I sold everything that mattered. He never even spelled my name right in the end. David did, every single day until I made him stop.